This is Learning to Dad.
I'm the cool dad. That's my thing.
With Tyler Ross.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills.
I'm gonna have fun, and you're gonna have fun.
Hello, I'm Tyler Ross, and this is Learning to Dad. My guest today is Jim Scott. Jim worked for Major League Baseball Productions for over 2 decades as a producer, writer, editor, interviewer, and location director, and eventually sold commercials for MLB programming. In 2001, he shifted gears to join a global satellite provider called Pan Am Sat as sales director, where he worked with the NFL, ABC News, CBS News, and ESPN. 5 years later, Jim joined Kangaroo Media, which was responsible for developing the handheld device called FanView, which allowed its owners to watch live professional sporting events. Now Jim runs his own company called Pantheon Communications, where he continues to work in live events and programming, winning contracts with the NBA, the PGA, and more. Jim was nominated for an Emmy in Outstanding Achievement in Editing and won a bronze medal at the New York International Film Festival for Outstanding Producer. Jim's reputation is having expertise in repairing troubled relationships and building strong and lasting new ones. Based on all of these things, though, I expect Jim is most likely proud to be a father of 2 and grandfather of 1. Thank you very much for being here.
I'm pleased to be here, and boy, that's pretty impressive. Who is that guy? That doesn't sound like me at all.
Yeah, I think you've earned all of these things. So the intent of being here, as a parent raising a child, there's not really any metrics of success. It's not until your kid is grown that you realize whether you've done a decent job or not. And then on top of that, fathers and mothers and anyone else raising a child has to make a living as well. So what we want to talk about is kind of how the overlap of professional life and personal life impact each other and how to excel at both, because it's evident to me that you've excelled in your professional life, and I know one of your children pretty well and have met the other, and they are both wonderful people, and so I can't imagine somebody better to talk to about raising kids and running a business, having been an employee and a business owner yourself. So I want to start just with kind of your background a little bit, and as far as where your professional life was at the time you had kids. Like, what was kind of the evolution of your professional life? Where did you grow up? Where did you work? I understand you went to Vietnam and then came back and started working, or went back to school and started working. So I just want to get a little bit of primer on your background.
Yeah, I was born in Manhattan. My folks lived in Manhattan until I was about 5.5 or 6, and then moved to New Jersey, where I grew up, Edison, New Jersey, which is a really small town in New Jersey, about half an hour or so from New York, on the New Jersey side of the border. And it was kind of a nondescript, lower middle class area. I grew up there, went to high school there, didn't like school at all, was a solid C student, basically. Played a little baseball, wasn't a great athlete, loved baseball growing up. Was really small for my age growing up, and got tired of living at home. Couldn't find a job where I could make enough money to have my own apartment, and decided end of 1970, I called in sick to work, and I went to the Air Force recruiter and talked to him and signed up, and that was my ticket out of the neighborhood, out of the house, into a life of my own. I went in the Air Force in March of 1971. It was a 4-year tour. And first day in, flew to Texas, got to boot camp, and they started yelling at us the minute we got off the airplane. And went to bed that night, and I could hear guys crying, thinking, oh my gosh, what did we do? So,
wow.
That first night, I wondered if I had maybe done the wrong thing. Problem was, there was no way out of it for 4 years. But in the end, I learned independence, I learned discipline, I learned to, be on my own and kind of fend for myself, things I had never been able to do before. And it really, the 4 years I spent in the Air Force, I learned a lot more than I did in 4 years in college about the world and myself. And I think I wouldn't be the person I am if I hadn't done that, and I would highly recommend that to people who, just don't know what they want to do. They don't really have any kind of a path to follow through life. So that really helped me a lot. My time overseas was a little scary, but that, also taught me to appreciate a lot of everyday things.
Sure.
For a year overseas, I couldn't hop in my car and go to the movies, or, I love pretzels, and I remember somebody from home shipped me a box of pretzels, and
the little
and
things.
I locked them in my room because nobody else could take them. By the time they got shipped overseas, and by the time they got there, they were all crumbles and everything. But it was just a little piece of home, And this is in the time before cell phones and the internet, and this is 1972, 73. So there were no phone calls home. You wrote a letter, and it took probably 2 weeks to get home, and then if somebody read it and wrote a response, I wouldn't even look for a response in the mail for a month almost, So it really was like being on Mars, There was no way to directly communicate with anybody from home. And I wonder now, guys in Afghanistan or Iraq, they can get on Skype and talk to their families. And I wonder if that makes it harder, when you can talk to your kid or talk to your wife, and see them on a screen, and then boom, you turn around and you're back in a war, 7,000 miles away. It was a different time, and that changed me a lot as well. And I've always said the me that came back from overseas was not the me that went initially.
What were the big differences between the you that left and the you that came back? Were you like rebellious by nature and then suddenly straight and narrow, or?
No. I I was not allowed to be rebellious. It was growing up was tough. My father was an alcoholic, and my mother was not very affectionate, I guess is probably the best way to put it.
Sure.
We were never close. We never had any money. We never went on vacations or anything like that. So it was really kind of an austere, unhappy sort of childhood. And when I went in the Air Force, I was on my own. I could do what I want when I wanted, aside from being on duty. And I formed pretty close friendships. And I really kind of learned to be out on my own in the world, and it felt pretty good. My time overseas was, it made me appreciate what I had back home. Growing up, if you grow up here in Warrenton, you think the whole world is like this,
Sure.
And when I got over there, I saw, farmers working in rice paddies that were making maybe $30 a year, in income. People didn't have cars. They didn't go to a shopping center. It was shocking, to see that world compared to the world I grew up in. And that really made me stop and think. And it made me appreciate all the things that I had always taken for granted because I never knew any different. And it just showed me there was a world out there. And the world wasn't always like it was when I was growing up.
Did the change that you went through over your 4 years there, when you came back, change your perspective and relationship with your parents?
No. Well, that's an interesting question. I guess it changed it in the sense that when I came back, I had self-confidence that I never had before, and I for the first time wasn't dependent on them, which made me, I think, kind of a stronger, happier person. And it's funny. I remember my father driving me to the train to go into the induction center in Newark the day that I went in the Air Force.
Wow.
It was snowing, and I had to get on the 6 o'clock train in the morning or something. And he was crying on the way to the train because he knew I was leaving.
Yeah.
And because of what was going on in Southeast Asia at the time, neither one of us knew what I was going to be assigned to do. Right. And I think he realized that I may or may not come back, and I think he felt responsible for the fact that I wanted to leave home. And at that point in my life, leaving home to potentially go into a dangerous situation was a better alternative than staying at home. It almost wasn't a decision on my part. It was just, I've got to get out of here, and this is my only option, so I'm taking it. But when I came back on leave a couple of times, I think they were a bit stunned by my independence, and I never looked back. I could never go back to that life. Would never want to, and never could. And then it was, and especially overseas. I mean, I really learned to be independent, and I really learned that, I hope I'm around to see the sunrise tomorrow, which gives you a different perspective on life as well.
It creates a sense of urgency in doing the things you want to do with the people you want to do them with.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah. So it was a difficult experience, but it was one that I'm still grateful that I was able to have. It made me more mature. It made me more disciplined, more focused, I think. And then because I hated school. I never intended to go to college. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. But when I came back, I had that focus, and I thought, well, maybe I'll, I had a job for about a year, and I wasn't happy with that. And I thought, maybe it's time to try college. And I did. And that was another time I made that decision at the fork, and I went this way. Yeah. And that turned out to be a great thing.
And you were a little bit on the older side, and certainly on the seasoned side, having returned from overseas.
Exactly.
And you met your wife in college?
I did, but you're exactly right. I mean, I was going to college at the age that most people were graduating, and so I had a level of maturity that an 18-year-old kid who's never really been anywhere never had, and that made me stand out as being quite a bit different. Yeah. When I was in high school, women wouldn't even look at me. I always said if I had $1,000 bill stapled to my forehead, women wouldn't talk to me. And for the first time in my life, I was popular, and I was dating, and had a great social life. I loved school because it was like a 4-year vacation. I was taking classes on subjects that interested me, and I wound up being a solid C student in high school. I flirted with a 4.0 my whole way through college, and I wasn't even working that hard. I was just interested in it, Yeah. Went to class every day, never skipped class. I was, active participant in class, and it was a completely different experience for me. I really enjoyed it. It was like a 4-year vacation. Yeah. And because I had been in the military, the government paid for it. I went on the GI Bill. So I just needed to take out some student loans just for living expenses. That was about it. So I got my college education, and kind of went on from there.
Well, I'm interested in hearing about how you met your wife, and Caitlin, specifically your daughter Caitlin, told me to ask you how many times they met before he asked her out.
That's a very interesting story too. I went to school at the University of Bridgeport in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and I was in the on the ground floor of the library studying for my last final exam before I graduated. It was December of 1980. I graduated in December rather than May or June because I did an internship in the sports department of the New Haven Register newspaper. I was a journalism major. Yeah. So I was, kind of because of that internship, I was offset a semester. So I graduated in December of 80. But right before Christmas, probably it was December 15th or 20th, I'm sitting in the library studying for my last final, and one of my classmates, a woman named Julie, came in with a friend of hers and introduced me and said, "Jim, this is Lori. Lori, this is Jim." It was Lori had gone to high school and grew up with Julie, but Julie was a college classmate of mine, so that was the connection. And so they popped by and we chatted for a few minutes, but we were in the library, so we had to keep it down a bit. And as Lori says, I said something that made her laugh, so she thought I was funny. And but we said, "Nice to meet you," and that was it. And that was it. I mean, I don't think she ever thought of me after that, and I didn't really think of her. And then 6 months later, a friend of mine, who's still a very good friend of mine, who lives in Maryland, he had another year to go in school. He was a year behind me, but we'd become friends. And I went back to visit him on a Friday night, and we were going out to the local college pub. And lo and behold, there's my friend Julie with her friend Lori. And we talked for a little bit, and then we kind of made a tentative date to play racquetball. I was playing a lot of racquetball in those days. I started playing that when I was in the Air Force. And so we swapped information, and off I went, and something came up, and I couldn't keep the racquetball date, so I guess I called her. Or I didn't email her. There was no email.
Text her, email her.
Yeah. So anyway, so I kind of backed out of that, not intentionally to back out, but something came up and I couldn't do it, and we never, renewed. And then 6 months after that, so it was about a week or two before Thanksgiving, so it was about 11 months after we had first met in the library. I went to visit my friend Phil again, and there was a mixer in the student center. It was a reggae mixer.
Yeah.
And so I went back, and so he and I went, and I saw some friends, and I was getting late. I had to work the next day in New York, so it was about 10 o'clock, and I said, I got to leave. I got to get back after work tomorrow. And as I was walking out, I ran into another friend of mine who was there with her boyfriend, and then we started talking. And so I was there like in 15 minutes more than I intended to be. Yeah. And as I walked out again, continued to walk out, there's my friend Julie and her friend Lori. And for the first time, I looked at her and I said, I have to take her out.
Yeah.
I have to go out, I want to take her out to dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like I just noticed her for the first time. So we talked, and I said, look, I have to go. I have to work tomorrow. I'm here like an hour later than I intended to be. But I said, when are you going to be home again? She was going to school at UMass up in Amherst.
Okay.
I forgot to mention that. So I said, when will you be home again? And she said, well, I'll be home for Thanksgiving. So we made a date. I said, look, we'll go out the Saturday after Thanksgiving. I said, I'll come pick you up. We'll go into New York. And she said, okay. And then, so that was probably 2 weeks later. So the Saturday after Thanksgiving, I, dressed up, cleaned up, and I went to the house where she was, where, she lived with her parents up in Easton, Connecticut. And I was driving this Datsun B210, old car. I had no money,
Yeah.
I was making about $13,000 a year, as a producer for Major League Baseball in New York.
Yeah.
And it was just the biggest, most beautiful house I had ever seen. The neighborhood was ridiculous. And there's a Saab and a Cadillac in the driveway, and I'm driving this old Datsun B210 hatchback.
Sure.
And I thought, I can't go in there and pick her up. This is ridiculous. Look at this is her world. It's not mine.
Yeah.
And I drove around the block 2 or 3 times, and finally I just said, screw it, I'm going in. And I pulled into the driveway and knocked on the front door, and her stepfather opened the door and put his big hand out and said, hi, I'm Bob. And
Yeah.
I went in, and it was just the most beautiful house I'd ever been in.
Yeah.
I picked her up, and we drove down to Stamford to get the train, and took the train into Manhattan, and we spent the day. Had a great time. We took her to the Guggenheim Museum, and she thought, well, you like sports. What do you know about museums? I said, well, I'm a little more well-rounded than that, And then we took the subway downtown and we watched the sunset from the top of the World Trade Center.
Wow.
And then took the subway back uptown and went to a restaurant that a friend of mine recommended. So it's very romantic. It's really nice,
Mm-hmm.
And so we went there for dinner, and then we went to the lobby of the Grand Hyatt next to Grand Central Station, which is where the train into town was.
Yeah.
And because I knew she was an interior design major, and they had just renovated the lobby. And so we went there for a drink, and then we just sat there and we were talking about stuff. Her father was an alcoholic, mine was an alcoholic. We had all this in common right away about not having the best childhood ever. And it's so funny because we said that if we ever got married and had kids, not necessarily to each other, but if we ever got married and had kids, that we would do the exact opposite of what our parents did. That would be our yardstick.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I looked at my watch, and it was 25 after 1 in the morning. The last train back to Stamford was at 1:35. I had 10 minutes, and
Yeah.
luckily we were right next to Grand Central Station. So I, paid the bill, got out, and we just barely caught the train. I was thinking her parents would kill me if we missed the last train back to Connecticut. So I got her back to her house at like 3 in the morning. I had picked her up at 10, on that, Saturday morning. Got her back home about 3 o'clock.
That's a big first date.
It was a huge first date, and everything just was perfect, really.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I got to get back. I have to get up at like 4 hours to go back into work. And and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So I sent her a dozen roses up to her dorm, after that. And then I just couldn't wait to see her again. And then that was it. I was driving up to Amherst on weekends for a while when I wasn't traveling for work.
So how long until you all got married and then had kids?
That was November of '81, because I graduated in '80. That was November of '81. We got engaged. We dated exclusively, and then I think the following October, like 11 months later, we got engaged. Mm-hmm. It was '82, and then we got married in June of '83.
Were you still making your $17,000 a year working for MLB?
By that point,
grinding?
Not much more, maybe 20, not much more. Oh, and which reminds me, after we had gotten engaged, I started thinking about that. And her parents, he owned a business. They had a condo up on a golf course in the Cape.
Yeah.
They had this beautiful house in Easton, Connecticut. They had a condo down at a golf course in Florida, outside Sarasota. And, they had money.
Yeah.
And I never expected to be able to, play in that world.
Sure.
And we went out to dinner, and I said, look, I have to say something. And I said, I don't want you to answer. I want you to think about this for like a week.
Yeah.
And then think about it. I said, if we get married, I have no idea how much money I'll ever make. And I said, if you marry me, you're giving up this lifestyle, because I'm not taking money from your parents. I'm not going to do it. And I said, you need to think about whether or not you're willing to do this and give all this up, at least for a while, maybe forever. And she said, well, I said, don't answer me. I said, just think about that. And I said, I said, I would rather have you tell me now, I guess I can't, and have it end this way than, 10 years from now, we're married with 2 or 3 kids, and you just say, I'm tired of living this shithole, and, we never have money, we don't go anywhere, we don't do anything. I said, that's not going to happen. I said, I will understand if you can't do it, but I said, I just think we need to think about this. And, end of the night, she said, I don't need to think about it. This is what I want to do. I love you, and I want to marry you. So we got married in June of '83, and within 2 years, her parents had lost everything.
No kidding.
Yeah. The economy went south. He owned an electrical supply company, lighting and stuff, and construction was down, so all of his commercial business was down. And Uncle Sam took 2 of their 3 houses. They just said, these are ours for back taxes, and he was putting expenses on credit cards to keep the business afloat, and they lost just about everything. Yeah. And like within 5 years, I was making more money than they were, which was, I never saw that coming, never. And then we got married in '83. Kate was born in March of '85, so 2 years after that, and Kate was about 6 months old. And Lori said, she hates going to daycare, and Lori was an interior designer, so she was working basically 6 days a week, including Saturdays, because she would have to, meet with clients on Saturday. That's when they were off. So we had 1 day a week off together. I was traveling, if Kate got sick and couldn't go to school, Lori would say, well, I can't stay home with her. I have a meeting with a client. And I said, well, I'm going to Chicago tomorrow. I'm not even going to be here, because I was traveling about 1 week a month.
Wow.
Probably, okay. Yeah. It was really difficult. And then Lori said, I want to take the summer off to spend with Kate. Do you think we can afford it? And I sat down and did all the math on what her gross salary was, and then minus taxes and minus daycare and minus dry cleaning and lunches and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And, as hard as she was working, after taxes and expenses, we had about $5,000 a year to do anything we wanted with. And I said, well, why are we going through this for $5,000 a year? So I said, yeah, take the summer off. And it was great. Kate loved being with Lori, and Lori loved being with Kate. She was an at-home mom. And then kind of interestingly, a couple of our friends were in a situation where they were looking for somebody to provide daycare for their kids because they had to go back to work because they needed benefits.
Okay.
And Lori said, "Well, I'll watch your baby, your son, your daughter," because they were friends of ours.
Sure.
And she said, "Pay me half the going rate. That's fine. I'm home anyway."
Yeah.
And she wound up watching kids of 2 or 3 of our friends. So then our kids had someone to play with. And she was making money, and she was making more money after taxes doing that than she was going out and working.
Right.
So we were actually better off financially, which was weird. And she did that until Brennan, who was born 4 years after Kate. She did that until Brennan went into first grade when he was in school all day.
Yeah.
And then she didn't know what she wanted to do. She loved kids, decided to try substitute teaching. She did that. And then 2 years into that, she got a full-time teaching job. So that's how she
Continues
migrated
to teach.
into teaching. Yeah.
So when you had Kate in
83.
80,
I'm sorry, 85.
85. How did that impact your day-to-day professionally? Did you have to start changing the way you used your time, or did your job prevent you from having much flexibility to manage a new experience in life?
Yeah, it was all on Lori, because she was a stay-at-home mom. Thankfully, we were able to make that work, and I was, still at the very early stages of climbing the ladder at baseball and still traveling a week a month. And in fact, logistically, we owned a condo up in Connecticut, and then part of the company at baseball branched off, and they started a new satellite highlight feed service, which was in New Jersey by the Meadowlands, and I couldn't do the commute every day. It was just too far. So for almost 2 years, I was living. I took a bedroom in an apartment with a friend of mine, and I was driving into New Jersey on Monday morning and driving back to Connecticut on Friday night. So for 2 years, no one saw me Monday through Friday. I wasn't even living in the house. So Lori was really a single parent, and she kept everything afloat. And there was really no way around it for us to do that. But that was kind of tougher for her, obviously. But it was what we had to do at the time.
Well, Caitlin told me that you often will wish aloud how you wish your kids were younger or smaller still sometimes. Is that a result of, just kind of being around on weekends for 2 years?
You know what? I hadn't thought of it that way, but I'm sure that has something to do with it. I think the thing that's more obvious to me is that I really, really miss them being little. And, when first Caitlin and then Brennan left to go to college and get off on their own, I was feeling a little sorry for myself because, I missed them and I wasn't their everyday dad anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really difficult when you stop and realize that part of my life is over.
Yeah.
I'm not the father of, little kids or teenagers, or, I don't see them every day anymore.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, when Caitlin went away to college, down here at James Madison, I was depressed. I was about that far from seeing someone, because it just, it killed me that I couldn't see Caitlin every day anymore. So I would come down, during the week sometimes. I'd try and work remotely, or Lori and I would come down together. But that first semester was really tough. It took me a while to adjust to her being away and living on her own. But so it was tough to really accept the fact that part of my life was over, because and after those 2 years where I was away, Monday through Friday, I really appreciated the fact once we were all living together, and we sold our place in Connecticut, and that's where we moved into our house in New Jersey 30 years ago now. Once we were all together, it was like, oh, great, finally we have a really nice house, and we're all together again, and no more, leaving on Monday and coming home on Friday. So I guess like everything else, when you miss something for a while, you just appreciate it more.
Sure.
When you finally have a normal, everyday, day-to-day life.
Day to day, I'm curious. We kind of jumped from them being born into leaving for college. I'd be interested to hear your take on what you said previously about growing up, talking with Lori, your wife, on your first date, saying, if we have kids, you or anybody else, I'm going to do exactly the opposite of what my parents did.
Yeah.
Would you share something that maybe the experience you had and then the deliberate effort you made to 180 that experience for your kids, growing up?
Yeah, I think that the thing that really kind of killed me growing up as a kid was that I was always meant to feel like I didn't have the right to have feelings or, to have my own opinion, or I was just kind of like pushed aside.
Specific to your unit, or do you think that was a result of the generation of parents?
I think it was a generational thing. I really do. My mother's father, my grandfather on my mother's side, was German, and they have, Germans, I think, tended to have kids are kids, and we should never hear them speak, and
Right.
and it was a difficult life for them. My father was an alcoholic, and they both worked. They didn't really have any money. They were living paycheck to paycheck, so it was it wasn't the house of fun.
Yeah, sure.
And having kids of our own, and the same for Lori. Her dad was an alcoholic, and they had problems. Her parents got divorced, and mine should have, but neither one could afford
Sure.
to live separately.
Yeah.
Her parents got divorced, and to see our kids and to hold them and to look at them and to just fall in love with them, as they were growing up, instead of saying, no, you can't do that because I said so, which was the thing we always heard.
Yeah.
We said you can't do this. There was a reason for it. You can't do it because this or that.
Whereas your was probably because I said so.
Right. Oh yeah. And Lori too. Because I'm your mother or I'm your father and I said so. And no further explanation than that. And that was one of the things we said we were going to do differently. And we did. We had great relationships with our kids. Not to say that there weren't times where we had to be strict and they had to be upset for a couple of days. And
I'm gonna quote your daughter as soon as I can find it. She said, "D is for dad and discipline." Let me find the line. You don't want to be caught in the Jim Scott stare.
Yeah, actually, it's the stare was just this look, and if I raise the eyebrow, and they knew, all right, he's not messing around now.
So did you ever have to back up that stare? I mean, part of an interesting experience for me as having kids, a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, was like, how do I keep them in their lane when they're behaving in a way that's not constructive or is rude or whatever? Like, did you punish them as kids, or did you, how did you make them good kids?
But the overarching thing was consistency.
Yeah.
I think we've all seen parents who say, well, don't do that or you're going to be in trouble, and then they do that, and then nothing happens, and so they realize there are not going to be any repercussions for me, drawing on the wall or whatever.
Right.
So when we set a limitation on whatever it was, the limitation was set. There was no getting around it, and if you did what we said you couldn't do, we did whatever we said the punishment was going to be, and it was consistent throughout. And I learned, I think, from maybe my time in the military, that discipline has its rewards. And just my overall philosophy was, the world's not going to give you anything. You have to earn everything that you get and earn, and any reward you get.
Yeah.
And I wanted Kate and Brennan to understand that they had to be responsible for themselves, and nothing was going to be handed to them. They had to earn everything they were going to get. So that was my goal. As a parent, you want to teach your kids everything you can about how to navigate the world, the good times and the bad times, because there'll be a day when I'm not going to be here for them to say, hey, Dad, what should I do? And so, I really was focused on teaching them sort of an approach to life, so that when I'm, someday when I'm not around, they'll know what to do. They won't have to, come back and ask. Yeah. And, there were times where they got mad at me, and they wouldn't talk to me for a couple of days, and then, they would get over it. It worked. Lori once said to me, Caitlin and Brennan, they never did drugs as far as I know, or, go out and get drunk and wreck cars or anything. Mm-hmm. And Lori said, well, they never did that stuff because, they were more afraid of you than they were of the police. And I said,
I have a story.
Oh, yeah. And I said, well, you say that like it's a bad thing,
Yeah. Caitlin told me that she at one time was pulled over for going way over the speed limit.
She was doing 90 on the New York State Thruway. That's a really good story. She was doing 90 on the New York State Thruway, going up to visit. She was in college, going up to visit her friend, and she got this ticket, and it was $150 for the speeding ticket or whatever. And I found out how fast she was going, and I said, and she was home from school, in Virginia for Christmas break. I said, give me the keys. You're not driving the rest of the time you're home.
Yeah.
The next time you drive the car will be when you're going back to school. And I said, if my insurance company raises my rates, you're paying me the difference.
Yeah.
And you're paying for the ticket. I said, that's without even discussion. And I said, the only, you can have the car if you, I think she was waitressing part-time or something. Mm-hmm. You can go to work and come back, but no driving the car to go visit friends, none of that.
Yeah.
And she said, well, that's not fair because, the police are punishing me with the ticket. And I said, Kate, do you know what would have happened to you if you had a blowout doing 90 on the thruway? I said, they'd be hosing you off the thruway.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be anything left of you. I said, you can't ever do anything like that again. And and she was all upset because she couldn't have the car on vacation. And I said, she goes, that's not fair. And she's crying. And I said, you want to be able to drive the car anytime you want? She said, yeah. I said, go upstairs, pack your bags, go back to Virginia, and you can drive the car. Well, what about Christmas? I said,
yeah.
You won't be here. You'll be in Virginia by yourself, but you'll be able to drive your car, anytime you want.
Explanations.
So I said, you make the call. It's your choice. You can do either one. But I said, you can't stay here for Christmas with us and have the car for recreational purposes. So
Caitlin has described you as, one, the best grandpa in the world, two, that you have tremendous respect for people, that you sacrifice yourself to give them a better childhood than you had, and that you have an incredibly deep love for your children. And when you have to have a conversation like that with your kid, like, you have to, I don't know if it's that love that's coming out that like makes you almost angry, but she's also described as being terrified of you.
Well,
so how do you balance those? Like, from where are you coming from when you're laying down the law like that?
Yeah. Well, I think you lay down the law because you love your kids and you don't want them doing anything stupid, and you don't want them to learn a lesson the hard way.
Yeah.
You'd rather have them learn a lesson because you explain what the repercussions can be. But, as we all know, sometimes the lessons that you learn best are the ones that you learn the hard way.
No question.
Yeah. So, as a parent, I think any parent wants to avoid having their kids learn lessons the hard way whenever they can. And I wanted to scare her and get her upset because I was pretty sure that she was never going to be driving 90 on a highway again, So I really didn't see me as having any other option except to come down hard on something that's serious. When Kate was in grammar school, she got into a charter school, and we went to this charter school and sat with each of the teachers, and they were talking about the curriculum and everything. And we got into her math class, and the math teacher handed every couple 3x5 index card, and he said, my wife and I are having our first child, and we're a little nervous about it, and he said, but all of you have apparently done something right because your children are in this school.
Yeah. And
he said, I'd like you to just write your best advice for how to be a parent on this card.
Yeah.
I just wrote 3 words. I said, just love them.
Yeah. It's I find a lot of punishments and lessons come from a place of power or a place of trying to establish dominance or a parental hierarchy. But when people ask me the same thing, like just love them more.
If you, I mean, there's no rule book for it. I think you can go back and look in the index and say, oh, what do you do when they write on the walls with crayons?
Yeah.
I think you love them, and everything is by instinct. Everything's kind of by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, we're all experiments, aren't we? Nobody knows how to do it right.
Yeah, there's no manual they hand you when you go out of the hospital after you've had especially your first child. But I think if you just love them, I think everything just comes naturally, and you just figure out how to do the right thing, and it is a mixture of discipline when it's required, because it is sometimes.
Yeah.
And just being goofy and having fun at other times, and treating your children from the beginning with respect, so that they understand that your feelings matter, the things that bother them matter, and they need an explanation for why it's good to do this, or why you shouldn't do that.
Do you feel like your role has changed since from zero to leaving for college to where now you're a grandfather? Like your role as a dad to Caitlin and Brennan, is it different now than it was 15 years ago?
I don't think it's really changed at all. I mean, the one difference is that there is, when they're little, you're 100% parent, and as they get older, I think the percentage of you're their friend, as opposed to just their parent, changes a little bit. We've done. Well, it's funny because Kate was a swimmer in school and Brennan played hockey, and frequently, it was at the same time. So we got into this pattern where one of us would go to the swim meet and one of us would go to the hockey game, and we'd switch off. So there was a lot of, mother-son, father-son, mother-daughter, father-daughter, one-on-one stuff.
Caitlin mentions that as being like a highlight, and how important that was to her, that you got quality time with each individual kid and each individual parent.
Yeah, because, whether you're a boy or girl, when you're doing something with your father separately or with your mother, you do different things,
Yeah.
And then, we had our times where it was the four of us together. So there were plenty of times where it was one of us with each of them. But as they got older, we would just do more, just friend stuff. Brennan used to be in this hockey camp up in Canada, so I would take him up to this hockey camp for a week in Canada. And that same week, Lori and Kate would fly down to Cancun and lay on the beach for a week together and just sit and read books and chat and and I've taken both kids separately to Europe for a week, where we just hang out and do whatever we want. And I took the first trip I did. Kate did a semester in Florence when she was a junior in college. Wow. And I had been traveling to Europe for work a lot. And I read this article about, it was an interview with Gwyneth Paltrow. Mm-hmm. And her father, Bruce Paltrow, used to be a television producer. He produced a show called St. Elsewhere that was on NBC in the 80s. Okay. So he was a big Hollywood guy. And but in the article, she talked about the time when she was, I think, 16 or 17, and her father took her to Paris. Because her father had passed away, and the interviewer asked her, what was her best memory of her time with her dad. And she said, my father took me to Paris when I was a teenager because he said that every woman should see Paris for the first time with the first man she ever loved.
I gotta go book a trip with my daughter.
Which I thought was just the greatest thing. So I said to Kate, you're not just gonna fly to Florence. I said, I'm taking you to Paris for a week. Oh, wow. And then at the end of the week, you'll get your hop to Florence, and I'll fly back home. So we took off, went to Paris, and I said to her, look, when we land, I said, no naps, no sleeping, because it's the overnight flight. And I said, we're going to take a shower, change, and we're going to get out and just start, looking around. And so we did, and we're just walking around Paris, and her eyes,
Yeah.
And it was such a great, I had been there several times before, and I love Paris. It's just a great city, so beautiful. But it was so much fun to see her discover Paris. And as she was growing up, she and I would do these father-daughter dates. We'd go into New York and would go out, and she loved good food,
Yeah.
And so we'd go to a restaurant, and she was like 9, and she'd order the duck or salmon or something, and I always thought, I can't wait until she's old enough so that when we go out to dinner, we can get a bottle of wine. Because at home, when she was 15 or 16, she'd get to have some wine with dinner.
Sure.
And I just thought, I can't wait till we go out to dinner and I can get a bottle of wine. But, she has to be 21.
Yeah.
So that week in Paris, she was still 20, but that night we went out to dinner, and I was able to get the bottle of wine. So the first time she and I had dinner with a bottle of wine was in Paris, which is one of my favorite stories and one of my favorite days ever. That we got to do that, and we had so much fun. We sat there. We closed the restaurant. The waiter fell in love with her, and they just kept bringing us all these food and drinks and stuff. It was really kind of funny, but we had a great week together. And then so she went off to Florence, and then Lori and Brennan and I went over there for a week when she had a semester break. I rented an apartment over there, and we all spent a week together in Florence, which is Brennan's first time outside the U.S. And Kate spoke a little Italian at the time, so she went to a store and was talking to which was kind of funny. So, and she was flying back about a couple of weeks before Christmas at the end of her semester, and I thought, I'm going to do that again.
Yeah.
So I called United, and I booked myself a flight to and from, and she was connecting back through Paris back to Newark, and so I changed her flight. I moved her return flight back a week, so I got to Paris. They took the overnight flight, got there at 8 in the morning, and Kate's flight was coming in from Florence at like 10 or 10:30. So I got there a couple hours ahead of her. Yeah. And then she had to get her bag, so she was waiting in baggage claim, and I walked up behind her and I said, "Kate!" And she jumped and she said, "Oh," and she screamed, and people were looking at us.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and so I said, I have some bad news and some good news. And she said, "Well, what's the bad news?" I said, "Well, you're not going to see Mom today." And she goes, "Well, what's the good news?" I said, "We're going to be in Paris for another week."
Yeah.
So we went back and we did the week all over again. And the first time, I took her to all the tourist sites, and Notre Dame and the Eiffel Tower and all that. And I said, "This week, we're just going to do whatever we want to do, and we'll just sit. If we want to go sit in a cafe and drink a bottle of wine or whatever." And that's what we did. We just hung out for the week, so, and that was fun.
So you made basically the full migration almost from 100% parent to 50-50 friend-parent to more friend.
Yeah.
Like, how do you perceive, what do you think that migration's going to look like for your grandson, Jack?
Well, I think the percentage changes, at a time like that, for that week, we're 100% friends, right?
Sure.
And then there are times when Kate or Bren will need us to be the parent, and then we go back in that moment or at that time to being 100% parent. So it kind of fluctuates, but it's nice to know that we can be both. And I think that based on, in the same way that Lori and I based our approach to being parents on a negative experience growing up, saying we're going to do the exact opposite. And Cole's parents, Caitlin's husband, Cole's parents are wonderful parents, great people. Kate and Cole, both, their approach is we're going to do exactly what our parents did. And I think that their approach to raising Jack and any other kids they may have will be the same. I think they're going to have a lot of fun together. I think they'll make sure that Jack doesn't become a spoiled little brat, that he stays humble, that he treats other people well and with respect and has empathy for other people. And I want Jack to grow up to be like Brennan. Yeah. Basically.
That couldn't be a more wonderful idea to hold as a parent, to think that my grandparent, I would be proud to have my grandson grow up to be like my son. But I want to do a little bit of a lightning round. I got a couple of questions and I want to get your quick answers.
Okay.
So if you were to write a book about your professional and parental life, what would be the name of some of the chapters?
Wow. That's
It's not a lightning answer.
no.
Think about
I'm
it.
sorry. I'm throwing you off your pace here right away.
I start with the slow one.
I think chapter 1. If I was writing a book about becoming a parent, chapter 1 would be those 3 words of advice I wrote on the index card. Just love them.
Just love them.
Yeah. Chapter 2 might be 90 miles an hour. To talk about times when you just, when you have to be a hard ass, because there will be times when you're gonna have to be a hard ass. One of the chapters would probably be explain it, as opposed to the because I said so, kind of thing.
Right.
I think that's really critical. Have fun is important. One of the things that, well, I think the 2 things that are probably the biggest reasons that Lori and I are happily married after 37 years, and I wonder sometimes how she can still love me after all that time, is I think one of the things is because I travel as much as I do, we have the benefit of being apart and looking forward to getting back
missing
together.
each other.
We don't see each other, 7 days a week, every day. And I think things can get a little boring after a while that way. But we laugh about something every single day.
Yeah.
Not just a chuckle, I mean like a real laugh every day.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm grateful for and that I really love about Caitlin and Brennan, they're both really funny.
Yeah.
And I don't know how people without a sense of humor can get through life, especially when things are not going so well. I think a sense of humor is critical, and I think the fact that Lori and I laugh about something together every day is really important. And I think that Kate and Bran would pass that on to their kids because a sense of humor is important. So one of the chapters, I guess, would be just laugh or laugh about it, or something like that. I think that's really very important. I don't know, what's that, about 4 or 5 chapters?
Yeah, I
maybe?
think that's good.
Okay. Yeah.
What is, in just a couple words, the role of a father?
Guidance, love, lessons, help. I think it's really important for a child to know that they can say anything to their parents, confess anything, admit to anything, and know that the immediate reaction is not going to be that you're going to yell at them. It's going to be, why did you do it? How does it feel? That kind of thing. Just to try and take, whether it's something fun or something terrible, to take an instance and learn from it. So I think, in that sense, guidance and maybe refuge, just to know that you can always count on your parents to not be judgmental. Maybe they will sometimes. Sometimes it might be difficult to avoid that, but at least they'll try not to be anyway.
I like refuge particularly.
Yeah.
What is a physical gift? If you could give a gift to every dad on the planet, what's something that you would give to them?
A physical gift. Yeah. It's funny. I would say a photo of their grandchild, because when I look at Jack, I see Kate, certainly. I see in his personality, I see a little bit of his Uncle Brennan, and I think, through Jack, it's really a confirmation of having done a good job as a parent, because you pass that on. And I've always said that if I can only be good at one thing, it damn well better be being a father.
Yeah.
Because that's the one thing that if I'm good at it, it can have an effect on the lives of a generation that I'll never be around to see. Lori and I have passed on what we've passed on to Kate and Brennan. I can see Kate passing that on to Jack. Jack then can be the kind of parent, hopefully, that he learned to be from Cole and from Kate, and then he'll be that same parent to his kids, you know, and maybe pass that on. So I think that if I could give a parent a picture of their grandchild and to see how that grandchild turned out, because it meant, if it's good, you know, it means that they were a good parent, you know, to their children, and I think that's the best reward that you can have, you know, and you know, this morning I got to sit and read Jack a little bit, and he was surprised to see us there this morning, and he was very happy about that, and that's a great reward, you know, it really is. And I have two goals now. I want Jack to think I'm the coolest grandfather around, and the other one is that I want to live long enough to take him out for a pint.
Yeah.
I want to be able to do that. You know, I guess in the same way that I wanted to take Kate out to dinner and have a bottle of wine. I want to be around long enough to, you know, say, come on, Jack, let's go out for a beer. And
really
take him out for a pint. Yeah. And hopefully he'll learn something from me, too. Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue into another conversation, or into another question, rather. So, for your kids, audio can be around forever, and just maybe they get an opportunity to listen to this.
Yeah.
So, if you want to take a minute to say something, what's something you might want to say to Caitlin's great grandchildren, or Brennan's great grandchildren?
I'd say that I'm really sorry I didn't get to meet you. I hope that you're happy, and I hope you're living a great life. Being the father of your great grandmother or grandfather was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I hope that because of what I and your great grandmother did to raise our kids, Caitlin and Brennan, that the good part of that got passed all the way down to you, and that you're happy and living a good life. And if I'm 2% responsible for that, that's a pretty good thing. Yeah.
I love it. So, what is a TV or movie dad that you like or relate to?
It's very funny. The first one that comes to mind is Modern Family.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? And I just saw it the other night. Now I'm forgetting his name.
Phil Dunphy.
Phil Dunphy. Yeah. Because
Me too.
Yeah, because he's goofy, but he works hard and he loves his family, and he tries to have fun with them, and he's just like this open, honest guy who does his best, and clearly, his family is the most important thing in the world to him. Yeah, I guess I'm sure there are others, but that's the first one that really comes to mind. Yeah. Phil Dunphy.
I love that one.
Yeah.
So, what are 3 qualities that make up, or that a super dad would have? Somebody that's just an amazing dad. What's 3 qualities they would have?
Let me backtrack and add one more to that answer about the father.
Yes.
You watch This Is Us?
I've seen a couple episodes. My wife is a diehard.
Yeah.
Jack,
any of the guys on that show who are parents.
Yeah.
It's a great show,
Yeah.
and those are the kind of guys that every dad should be like, I think. And I'm sorry, now your next question.
Oh, no, yeah. Maybe you can draw straight from that, but the qualities, what are 3 qualities that somebody needs in order to be a really great dad?
A sense of self-awareness, I think, is pretty important, so that you can see your life and your children's life in its proper perspective, and that you understand what your responsibilities are and how you have to carry them out. As I said before, I think a sense of humor. I think, I want to say selfishness or selflessness, but and I've said this to people before. as a parent, you have to make sacrifices along the way. But if you ask me, what was one sacrifice that I had to make for my kids, I couldn't think of anything, because I've never done anything, whether it was something I was forced to do or had to give up or whatever. I've never had to do anything that I ever thought of as a sacrifice, or something that I had to give up. It's always been, I'm going to do that, know. So I think selflessness, because you always have to think of your kids first, because they're the world to you. And some people shouldn't be parents.
Yeah.
Fortunately, some people know they shouldn't be parents and don't have kids. And I respect those people a lot for knowing that they probably shouldn't and acting on it. I feel really bad for people who really, really want to have kids, who would be great parents, who can't, when they go through, medical procedures to try and do it or adopt. And those people clearly are, selfless in their efforts to overcome, medical, physical hurdles to become parents. But being selfless is pretty key, I think.
Okay, so what is, for somebody like me who's got a 3 and a 4-year-old, or somebody who's not had kids yet but about to have kids, what are some of the milestones in your kid's life that jump out at you as the ones that people should really be present in, that parents should really make the effort to be that self-aware during that experience? What are some of those milestones?
Well, first I'll say that I'm a bit envious of you with the 3 and a 4-year-old, because you get to go through all those wonderful moments that Lori and I got to go through, and you still have that ahead of you. So I wouldn't mind being back in your shoes. It's just, there are some obvious things like, graduations and, playing sports and watching them play sports and encouraging them and celebrating when they do well, or, teach them a lesson from something, when they don't. That's one of the great things about sports, is that, it's sort of a, parallel to life, teamwork and working together to accomplish something, accomplish a goal, or shaking it off when you do the wrong thing, make a mistake and learn from it and move on. But I just think there are so many moments that just pop up out of nowhere when you can be there for them and you can have a laugh with them, share a moment, or use that moment as a teaching experience. And just some moments when it's fun, when they wake up and hop in bed with you on a Saturday morning, and you can wrestle around and have some fun. I think there's no end to those kinds of moments when you can really just be together and laugh and get a smooch. And Jack now is at the stage where Kate will say, "Give Grandpa a kiss," and he'll come over and that that just makes me feel so good. You know, when he was at our house a few weeks ago, I was sitting next to him while he was eating, and he grabbed my shirt and pulled me over and gave me a hug. So so there are just so many moments, potentially every day, where you can just have a great moment with your son or daughter, and they can feel the warmth and they can feel how much you care, and they because of that, I think when you try to teach them a lesson, I think all those moments that lead up to that, they pay attention and really think that you're teaching them the right thing, and that they should listen to you, just because you're a rock for them from the beginning. So I don't know that I can identify any specific things other than the obvious things, like if you're graduating from school or winning a league championship, if they're playing baseball, or those things can just happen every day.
Well, I've noticed it's difficult to be present in moments sometimes with a world full of distractions. I'm making a conscious decision now that if I'm playing with my phone and one of my kids comes into the room, I try to put it down, because I don't want to miss that moment if it happens, and I have to practice that. Did you have any awareness or mindfulness practices that help you be a more present parent or grandparent?
Yeah, I think because I was away at least a week a month,
Yeah.
and certainly in those 2 years where I was away the whole week, I think it kind of taught me to take advantage of those moments and to try not to be distracted. And there were times where I certainly failed, where I'd get upset about something about work, or
Yeah.
I mean, that stuff happens. I was really always conscious of making sure I was there for certain big moments.
Mm-hmm.
2 examples. I was the assistant coach on Brennan's soccer team when he was 5 or 6.
Yeah.
It was just swarm ball. Everybody was running around the ball.
Yeah.
And I was out in Los Angeles for a couple of weeks for work on a shoot, and he had a soccer game on the Saturday that I was away, right in the middle of the trip, and I really was feeling bad about missing the soccer game, and I thought, I'm going to fly home because I'm off for the weekend. I worked on Friday. I'm working on Monday, and I thought, I want to fly home Friday night, go to the game, and then fly back out to Los Angeles on Sunday. And I was staying in a hotel right near the airport in Los Angeles, and this is back in the day when you could do this stuff. It was American Airlines that I used to fly all the time. And I went over to LAX to the American Airlines desk, and I said, hey, look, I'm out here. My son has a soccer game. I really want to go back. I said, how much is just a quick round trip, leave on Friday, come back on Sunday. And the woman at the counter is doing this, and she said, oh, it's it's like $1,200. I'm like, I can't afford that.
Yeah.
And she says, wait a minute. She goes in the back, and she comes out with this guy, who I guess was the supervisor, and he said, I hear you want to go back home. Want your son play soccer for the weekend? I said, yeah. I said, I'm on this 2-week road trip. I'd really like to go back. I said, but I can't afford $1,200. And so he said, well, let me see what we can do. So he just goes in and he's doing this thing, and he said, how does $600 sound? I said, done. He said, okay. So he writes out the ticket and hands the ticket to me. He booked me first class.
No kidding.
For $600 round trip.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And he said, you're being a great dad.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing.
But I didn't do it to be a great dad. I did it because I wanted to see him play.
Yeah.
So I got to fly home, and I watched him play, in the game, and help coach, and turned around and flew back out. And I said to him, is there somebody above you that I can write to thank you? He goes, oh, he says, no. He said, I might lose my job. I might lose my job over this. And with Kate, she was on the swim team in high school, and I think it was as a sophomore, and she had a swim meet, and if she came in, in the top 3 in one of the races, she would get her varsity letter.
Yeah.
And I worked in New York at the time on Park Avenue, and I had a dinner that night that I had to stay in New York for. And I was thinking about it, and I said, I really want to be there to see her, get her varsity letter. So I went to my boss. I said, I'll be at the dinner tonight, but I have to leave early because my daughter has a swim meet at 4 o'clock. So I went back to New Jersey.
Yeah.
Was in the stands, and she saw me in the stands and was freaking out, and she came in second in this race, and she got her varsity letter. So I was there to see her do that.
Yeah.
And she came up and gave me a big hug and everything. And I got my car and drove back into New York and went to my dinner. But I was there for that. And I was always, I'm not a very smart guy, but I was always smart enough to know that those moments were not going to last forever.
Yeah.
And it was really important for me to be there for those moments. And I think I did it as much for myself as I did for them. To be honest,
I can tell listening to you talk about it.
Yeah. And I always was aware about that, and I always made sure that I didn't miss that kind of stuff, because it was as important to me as it was to them, I think. And I think it made an impact on them. You know,
I've said to my friends that don't have kids, having kids is like buying a DeLorean time machine. It's just the second you have kids, you blink, suddenly 5 years has gone by. And to be present for those moments, like not just mentally present, but physically actually there, and to go through that.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that I would do all of those things because I know how important it was to me when my dad did those things, and I know how much fulfillment it would bring me to watch that also.
Yeah, and I think my recollection is that my father went to like one of my Little League baseball games, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, so my parents were never there. It didn't bother me, I guess, because I was used to
At the time,
having them there. Yeah. But yeah, that was always important. And you know, and you talk about a time machine. You know, Lori and I have always said it'd be great to go back to when Caitlin and Brennan were small enough that we could pick them up and you know, for a week, you know, just to have that again. And now having a grandson, having Jack, is kind of like that.
Yeah.
You know, because even though we're his grandparents, you know, kind of in a way you feel like almost like a parent again, you know.
Absolutely.
And we get to play with him and you know, and do fun stuff with him, and it is like we're getting our wish to have time go backward and to have that again.
Yeah.
And that just makes it more fun.
Yeah.
You know, that it's purely fun, you know. You know, we try to get down here once a month, you know, to see him. And after Lori retires from teaching in 4 years, we're moving down somewhere near here, so we'll be able to be around more often. But now that Brennan's in California, we'll be bi-coastal grandparents, you know, so we'll be doing a lot of back and forth. But it's really just so, on the one hand, it's very fulfilling to see your children have children and to love being parents the way, you know, you used to love being a parent when you were in that role.
Yeah.
It's a little sad to think that part of your life is over and now you're a grandparent. And I say to everyone who has kids, it's going to go faster than you can ever imagine.
Yeah.
And you know, right now there are 2 or 3 or 4, and you know, you're doing lots of stuff for them that they can't do for themselves. And before you know it, you'll be dropping them off at their dorm for their first day of college.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, and Kate, you know, the day she got married, you know, walking her down the aisle.
Oh God, don't talk to me about it.
Yeah, and I, you know, and it's funny because and I I still have the reminder in my calendar. Meet Kate at the barn at 5:30.
No.
You know, she had this outdoor wedding. It was a beautiful wedding. And I met her at 5:30 outside this barn on this property where the wedding was. And I was, you know, just standing there waiting for her. And I was just thinking, holy cow, you know, here's the moment that I've been thinking about since she was, you know, 1 probably, you know.
Yeah.
The proudest moment for a father, you know, well, if she marries somebody that you like. That's to me, that's the scariest thing about being a parent. You know, for 20 or 30, you know, years, you do everything you can to give them everything you can. And if they fall in love with somebody you don't like, you know, there's not a lot you can do about it. Yeah. Fortunately, that wasn't the case, you know, with Kate Cole. And you know, and then Kate walked up to me in her wedding dress, and I just said, "How did we get here?"
Yeah.
Really. Yeah, I really thought, how did we get here? Holy cow. And it just went like that. You know, all those father-daughter days in New York and, you know, trips to Europe and before she got pregnant with Jack, to her I said, you know, because I knew they were trying, and I said, you know what, we have one last chance to do a father-daughter trip.
Yeah.
And so I said, you know, I'll ask Cole for his permission. He's your husband, you know. I'm just your dad now. And I went from being, you know, number 1 on the medal podium to number 2, and now I'm number 3. Because now Jack is number 1, and poor Cole is number 2, and I'm down to number 3. If she has another boy, I'm off the podium. Yeah. And he said, yeah, sure. So she and I went to London for a week together, and it was right before she got pregnant. But the most fun that I think we had that whole trip, that whole week. We were around the theater district in London, and it started raining, and we just popped into this little brasserie right near the theater district, and I got a bottle of wine and some bread and some olives and stuff, and we sat there and drank wine and just snacked on bread and olives for like about 4 hours, just talking about stuff, and I just thought, what a great thing, to be able to do with your, I guess at the time she was 30 or 31, with your adult daughter, and the fact that she would want to spend a week, together. Because she had said, when we went to Paris, she said, one of her friends said, "Oh, I wouldn't spend a week with my father. Are you kidding me?" And I feel really bad for dads whose daughters wouldn't dream of going away with them for a week to do anything, or even a day, just to spend some time together and talk about whatever you wind up talking about,
This is a question that you reminded me of that I just wrote down that interests me. I did not appreciate how much my parents loved me until I had kids.
Yeah.
Do you think Caitlin has a different appreciation for her parents now that she's a parent? And do you think that a person can understand the depth of emotion with which you can love your child if they don't have a child?
I'll answer that in two parts. The first part of your question I will answer by saying that when Jack was born, I guess he was maybe a month old, and Kate said to me, "You mean you and Mom
Oh, God.
loved me this much?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, and we still do."
Yeah.
And it's so funny you asked that question, because I always knew, because that's how I felt.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really know what real, true, deep love is until you have a child.
Yeah.
It's unselfish. They're dependent on you from the moment they come into the world. They never know a world without you.
Mm-hmm.
And they go from being completely dependent upon you to being mad at you sometimes, all those things we talked about before. But it's the deepest kind of love there can be. It's not sexual or romantic or, fantasy. It really is true love.
It's unconditional.
And unconditional completely. And it was funny that Caitlin, when she said, "Do you mean you and Mom loved me this much?" I'm like, yeah. And we still do, and we always will. And so, and it's so great to see her come to that realization.
It's amazing.
And to see her, we get, thank God for technology now. You talk about, don't let your phone be a distraction. The good side of technology is we get to Skype a few times a week.
Yeah.
So we get to see him and interact with him, and he knows who we are when we come down. And just to watch Caitlin interact with Jack is, I think that's probably, of all the fulfilling moments I've had as a parent, I think that's the most fulfilling thing.
No kidding.
To see your child, interact and just be completely in love with their child. It's miraculous, really.
I believe it.
Yeah, it really is. Can't think of anything better.
So I'll end with one last question.
Okay.
It's a question that Tim Ferriss, another person who hosts interviews and podcasts, asks his guests, but I flip it to suit our topic, which is, of course, fatherhood and professional life. But if you had an opportunity to have a billboard on I-95, and every dad that drove by it got to read a message from you, what would you put on that billboard?
I would say probably, become a dad is the greatest thing that'll ever happen to you.
Yeah.
That's what it would say.
I love it. Well, let's call that a wrap.
Thank you. This is great.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for taking Kate's tip on the tissues. Yeah, it's hard not to get emotional about some of those things. Thanks for this. And it actually made me think about a couple of things I hadn't thought of in a while. So thank you for that.
No, I'm glad. It's been a lot of fun I've learned so much that I've actually already been able to put into practice. And it's validating because it's hard for adult men to have a conversation about how they feel. And I hope that these conversations are heard and, make an impact on people especially men who have a kind of can have a messed up definition of what it means to be masculine or paternal or to be a leader. So I'm grateful for your time and stories, and I'm looking forward to sharing it, and hope that people get as much out of it as just I already have.
Yeah, and I did too. So it was great. Thanks very much, Tyler.
Yeah, absolutely.